Hello guys, it is Nostalgia Egg here again with another video. Now I initially wasn't planning on ever making a response to this particular SMG4 Rant video, since I technically already reviewed it during the SMG4 Rant review marathon I was doing for my Instagram page back in March of 2022. But now that the topic has officially resurfaced again thanks in part to a Twitter call-out post made by the text commentary YouTuber Puddle of Pizza, I figured that now would finally be the time for me to tackle the worst of what this video had to offer, because believe me, there is more than enough awful to go around with this one. Now for those of you that need a quick recap, the video that I will be responding to is called Response to Modern SMG4, and it was uploaded by the YouTuber The Metal Blade 5, who is mostly known for his videos responding to game theory and death battle. At the time when this video came out, I was already done with watching SMG4's content, so I completely ignored its existence at first. So by the time I finally got to reviewing it for the SMG4 Rant review marathon, I wasn't prepared for how downright awful this video truly was. But before I get into the numerous problems that I, and many others have with it, I should first quickly acknowledge that the video itself from a presentation standpoint, is actually pretty decent, and even the articulation of the criticisms being presented is much better than a majority of what we come to expect with modern SMG4 Rant videos, and that includes points that I do/don't fully agree with. But just remember that even if a video may look nice, or sound perfectly reasonable on paper, it doesn't automatically make it either of those two things. So now that we have the introduction out of the way finally, it's now time for me to dissect this video from the top down, and showcase to you all why it's truly one of the worst things to come out of the SMG4 fandom.
SMG4 was one of the first channels I subscribed to after making my YouTube account, and I've watched it all these years. However, that has now left me in an awkward situation in regards to my feelings towards this series. I honestly didn't even realize I felt this way myself until fairly recently. But over the past several years, I haven't been enjoying SMG4 as much as I used to. Once the idea popped into my head, I had somewhat of an epiphany, where thinking back on my impressions of many of the newer episodes, I realized this to be true. Even looking at my liked videos playlist further backs this train of thought, as the frequency and gaps between SMG4 videos is far greater compared to the past, where almost every episode ended up on there. And that's not even taking into account the upload dates between them, which would show an even greater distance.
So starting things off, I would just like to highlight this video's intentionally manipulative framing that is constantly present throughout the entire runtime. If you don't understand what I mean by this, the video immediately opens up with a story regarding Metal Blade's attachment to the SMG4 channel as a whole, before reaching the conclusion that the videos aren't nearly as good as they used to be, therefore establishing its negative slant right out of the gate without explaining the reasons why beforehand. And this was a common tactic that numerous commentary YouTubers used to use back during the early days of the genre, before it was eventually phased out by the more analytical stylings of the modern-day video essayists. Given that the Metal Blade 5 was around during the genre's heyday, it does not at all surprise me that he tried to use the old tactics of framing the content negatively by presenting anecdotal evidence in order to create an anti-modern SMG4 narrative. Nothing manipulates an audience of people faster than a sob story.
We're even at the point where they're copying older episodes, but making them worse.
This specific point may not seem nearly as bad as the later ones we have coming up, but what it does showcase, however, is that Metal Blade didn't do his proper research before deciding to make this video, because this particular complaint has been attributed to nearly every single era of SMG4 excluding the 2011 through 2013 classic era. To go down the list real quick, a sizable portion of the 2014 era episodes have been called out for being rehashes of episodes from the classic era. These include %99% Birokin and Yoshrooms, 2 copies of 2013's 99.5% Crazy, The Visitor, a copy of 2012's The Imposter, The Winning Ticket, a copy of 2012's Rich Glitch, Meet the Mario, a copy of 2013's The Totally Accurate True Documentary of Mario, and most notoriously, Boyle the Big Bully, Who Let the Chomp Out, and Problematic Pipe Problems, are all copies of 2013's A Fungus Among Us. And while I don't personally find reusing plots to be a net negative in general, you can't selectively pick and choose which videos should be highlighted in order to suit your overall point, as you then disregard the reality that SMG4 has always been notorious for reusing plots. But at least with the modern episodes it's a little more understandable since it's been over a decade since most of those older ones came out, whereas with the randomness era the gaps in between episodes were only a singular year apart at best.
Another major issue I have with the modern content, and this is something I've always felt at the back of my mind, but only properly recognized after my epiphany, is the characters. Specifically, over the past couple of years, they have introduced tons of original characters who become part of the main cast, and this has only become more frequent as time's gone on. Not only does the existence of original characters go against part of the hilarity of SMG4, being how he takes these pre-existing characters and makes ridiculous parodies out of them, but most of the original characters are, in my opinion, boring, unfunny, incredibly forced in, and take away from the enjoyment of the series.
Now don't get me wrong, I can understand why some of the characters that were introduced from the 2016 era onwards wouldn't fully appeal to a lot of the classic and randomness era fans. But having that said, I do not think the mere existence of those original characters inherently goes against what the series stands for. Metal Blade may not want to acknowledge this fact, but SMG4, SMG3, Enzo, and all of the other Mario recolors that joined the series back during the classic era are all from a technical standpoint original characters. While yes, they are still reskins of pre-existing Nintendo characters, the same defense could also be used for the post-2015 characters such as Fishy Boopkins, Bob, and even Meggy, who were pre-existing Nintendo characters that were given their own names and personalities. But even if I were to entertain the idea that the Mario recolors didn't fully count as originals, the point still holds zero weight since both the Rocks and Wizard Rock character were two of the earliest original cast additions to the series. The SMG4 series has its roots in Super Mario 64 Machinima, which is a genre that is known for featuring original characters based off of the YouTubers in question. Even if we take your unfounded assumptions that SMG4 is supposed to be a Nintendo parody series only into account, the classic episodes by default fall outside of the boundaries. Since recolor characters like SMG4, SMG3, X, FM, Starman 3, MCG, Bot, and others are not parodies of anyone. So unless you are able to find me solid proof of Luke and or Kevin specifically stating that the utilization of OCs discounting the Mario recolors is entirely off limits, the notion that having completely original characters goes against what the SMG4 series is supposed to stand for is completely ridiculous.
Let's start with the most notable of all, who I consider the catalyst for the issues I've grown to have with the series. Meggy. I've always found her to be such a boring and unfunny character. Even back when she was an Inkling, she wasn't even a parody, since she has the exact same personality as any other Inkling, just with more dialogue. So it always bugged me to see her get constantly pushed to the forefront and made one of the main characters, in which she then became the Min of YouTube. The girl who everyone loves despite not doing anything to warrant such popularity. They absolutely refuse to do anything funny with her, being that she lacks a stupid, ridiculous, or flawed personality and is never involved in anything like slapstick, for example. She just flexes on everyone with her athletic and shooter skills and her lame tomboy attitude. I don't think I've enjoyed any Meggy-focused episode because she's such a boring character that it makes me feel bored and left with a painfully neutral impression. Yet she still gets the center of attention, with Luke and Kevin practically simping over her. They even gave her a fucking movie before anyone else!
While I wouldn't say that I fully agreed with what Metal Blade said about Meggy's character in this segment, I will admit that it was both this segment as well as the segments on Fishy Boopkins and Bob that led me into thinking this video really isn't that bad. But as with everything else that I've discussed so far, this segment also has a lot of issues. For starters, he makes a lot of incorrect assumptions in regards to Meggy's character lacking depth and never being used for slapstick comedy, when neither of these points are true in the slightest. As Meggy's personality is a lot more complex than a vast majority of the other cast members, both old and new, and she was often the butt of the joke when it came to the moments where she had to cook or restrain herself from shooting at her enemies.
Hey Wario, do you like my new shirt I bought from Target? Damn, this is a sexy shirt. Look at the big juicy target on this. It's like I'm asking to get shot. Oh man, it would be horrible if something bad were to happen to this t-shirt. My ovaries.
Oh, wait! Oh!
She may not have typically shown signs of weakness during a vast majority of her combat scenes prior to becoming human in 2019, but there were numerous episodes where she still displayed a lot of the same zany traits as the rest of the cast. And as another counter to this claim, despite being accused of being portrayed as a quote-unquote perfect character, Meggy didn't actually receive nearly as much favoritism as a certain other character from the classic era did, who not only took the spotlight away from certain characters that debuted before him, but also insisted that his character was portrayed in a positive light regardless of what Luke may have intended initially. I can name plenty of moments where Meggy in both her Inkling and human forms is treated just as unseriously as the rest of the cast, but I can't do the same for Starman 3. Nearly every single appearance he had felt forced and like he was given favoritism over Mario and SMG4. Meggy shares a lot of characteristics with Starman 3, but rather than being annoyed at stupidity like Starman 3 was, she is instead amused by it. Metal Blade may not have took this into consideration before making this video, but Meggy prior to her transformation at the end of the anime arc was the lowest recurring of the 3 main cast editions, featuring in a total of 37 episodes throughout 2017 and 2018, which is nowhere near Boopkins and Bob's highest totals of 65 and 60 respectively. Now this could have been attributed to the fact that she was often fully animated in comparison to the rest of the cast who alternated between Super Mario 64 models and Gmod ragdolls, but it only demonstrates the fact that Metal Blade is purposely exaggerating the role she had in the series early on in order to add validity to his argument, of which there is none. Furthermore, he also severely downplays the amount of growth she had gone through as a character and refuses to acknowledge all of the influential qualities that she ended up bringing to the series as a whole. She wasn't just a random character that fans decided to latch onto for no reason at all. Rather, she was an extremely influential character who became the reason for Luke deciding to incorporate true animation into the SMG4 series. That also carried an extremely likable personality that resonated with a majority of the audience. For every moment where she appeared to be competitive and snarky, there were others where she would laugh at herself for not succeeding in everything she wanted to achieve. And it was for those reasons that Luke and Kevin decided to take her character to the extreme and have it go through many life-changing experiences. So while I can understand why some fans don't personally resonate with her, the legacy she has created is undeniable.
I fucking hate Meggy due to certain behind-the-scenes factors.
She's a bitch!
So now, I skip over any episode that has Meggy in the thumbnail.
This is something that I didn't fully catch on my first watch-through of this video, and even on subsequent watches I still don't understand what the point being made about Meggy's former voice actor Lizzie Freeman is, as there is zero context being represented. So rather than being informed by the Metal Blade 5 himself on what this tweet is in response to, I instead had to seek out this other video actually showcasing the context to this situation. And from what I saw, it appears that she just has a personal stance against taking POC roles from actual people of color. I can maybe see why certain people on the right-wing side of the internet could interpret this as being a racist opinion, but this is nowhere near as bad as a majority of the genuine anti-white racism that I've seen over the years. And to be clear, I do not personally subscribe to this kind of ideology that people like Lizzie Freeman do, but I'm also not going to make a big deal out of it either. The fact that he even included this in the video without proper context just shows how manipulative his overall intentions were.
You know what I said before about how I didn't like characters like X, FM, and the other alternate colored Mario YouTubers being effectively removed? Modern SMG4 is like that on steroids. So many of the funny characters who helped make the series what it was, and even some who have been around since the beginning, have been severely pushed to the side and almost flat out removed to make room for the shitty new ones.
This was another criticism that I also somewhat agreed with when I first watched this video, but after doing my own personal deep dive into the flaws with modern SMG4 I realized that this point has a reasonable explanation that is never fully explored. That explanation being that most of the older characters don't really fit into the writing of the current episodes these days, as characters such as Bowser are only really necessary for episodes requiring an antagonist, of which there are very few in comparison to the earlier episodes. And discounting the arcs and similar story-centric episodes, a vast majority of modern SMG4 revolves around the antics of Mario and doesn't usually focus on the rest of the cast unless the writing would require it. At the time this video's examples of Toad, Peach, SMG4, Luigi, and for some reason Mario were already pretty weak as is, but from the Genesis arc onwards I'd argue that characters like Luigi, SMG4, SMG3, and especially Mario are even more important than they were before. So much so that a lot of the later cast additions such as Tari and Psycho, who each had their own segments in this video, are rarely ever given starring roles in comparison to when they were first introduced. Even a more recent addition, i.e., Melanie doesn't get as much screen time as the characters I mentioned before. And while there could be multiple reasons for that being the case, I think the lack of cast variety comes down to the majority of modern episodes being written with Mario and oftentimes Luigi, SMG4, and Meggy in mind, as opposed to writing episodes that utilize a larger cast of characters. Recent episodes such as A Happy Little Road Trip and My Roommate Mario are specifically designed to focus on a simpler cast of characters, as opposed to the older ones like Mario's Challenge, Mario Battle Royale, Wild Wild Mario, and Stupid Mario Sports Mix that are completely designed around utilizing a larger cast. So in other words, smaller ideas require minimal characters while bigger ideas require larger amounts.
Desti was never an important character, as she was only in one episode prior to this arc. Yet they treat it as if she was, by making out that this is some massively devastating loss and that we'll never see her again. Second is that in her one prior episode, and even during this arc, Meggy and Desti hated each other's guts. But now they suddenly act as if they were best friends, with Meggy becoming a sobbing, traumatized mess from her death. What?! Their rivalry did become more friendly in the episode before Desti's death, so I could see Meggy developing a bit of a mutual respect for her and being a bit sad by that, but not like, I don't know how I can go on. It's simply bad writing to make it more emotional when it shouldn't be this kind of emotional to begin with.
Now I don't intend to spend too long on his points regarding the anime arc, since most of his criticisms aren't completely unreasonable, but the points he makes about the aftermath of the arc on the other hand are quite the head-scratcher. Because for anyone who has actually seen the arc from beginning to end, as well as the follow-up movie Meggy's Destiny, you'd know that Meggy's trauma over Desti's death is mostly caused by the guilt she feels for thinking her failure to defend herself got someone killed. When you only view it through a surface-level lens, I can understand why some people may think her reactions are overdramatic, but when you look at it through a deeper perspective it's clear that Meggy feels the way she does because A, she watched her rival get killed right in front of her face, and it doesn't take a genius to realize that watching a person you know die will create some form of trauma, and B, she believed that her actions were the cause of it happening. So much so, that she even offered herself up as a sacrifice once she realized that the crew had no other way of beating Francis. So for a character that he describes as being bland, she clearly has a ton of emotional depth that you won't really notice on your first viewing. Cause I also didn't realize how complex she really was, until I started rewatching the anime arc in prior episodes like the X-Mess Discovery that showcase the multiple sides to her personality. And I'd argue that Desti's death was the defining moment where she became far deeper than any character who has entered the series before and after.
Now, the final thing I want to talk about in this video is Luke and Kevin's treatment of the older episodes. Going back round to the humor being worse, a lot of the dark comedy found in the previous eras is all but gone now, such as the whole Luigi being gay thing not existing anymore, and now he's just wimpy like his game counterparts. In addition to how this further correlates to many of the modern videos being uninteresting, as they replace them with these very safe jokes that are, once again, unfunny most of the time, on Hobo Bros, they've done a couple of reaction videos to the older episodes where they repeatedly say, we'd never be able to get away with that now. Well, more accurately, it's what Kevin claims.
Dude, we could never do anything like that in 2020, man.
Sounds a little fatalistic to me, but I guess that is partially to do with YouTube's bullshit demonetization rules, where it's like, you swore once, so you're not allowed to make any money. However, I don't bother to follow those rules because I think they're a load of shit. So I don't see why SMG4 should do it too, when part of what I enjoyed about it at first was how rebellious it felt with its sense of humor.
This criticism is something that I could have potentially understood had this video have been made in either 2018 or 2019, but in the post-SML getting a cease and desist from Nintendo and Leafy is here getting his entire channel terminated era, I don't think SMG4's darker humor would completely fly under the radar as it did in the years previous. Since the only thing it takes in order to get on the internet's bad side these days is to have an out-of-context clip posted all over Twitter attempting to paint the series as inherently problematic in nature. And while you could argue that certain communities do not promote this kind of bandwagon behavior, SMG4's channel is far too large and infamous among older fans at this point for people to let him get away with telling edgier jokes, especially the ones that would be labeled as too insensitive by today's standards. This could just be a personal thing, but I honestly never really cared for the edgier humor in the earlier episodes anyway. I can acknowledge that some of them executed it incredibly well, but it was typically very juvenile and didn't add anything to the episodes outside of making them targets for Twitter brigades. When I look back at some of my favorite episodes from the classic 2011 through 2013 era, I mostly admire them for their creative plots and unique cast of characters. In some cases the juvenile humor is actually a hindrance to the overall quality, such as the case with the War of the Fat Italians 2011 episode. It is fully possible for an SMG4 episode to be great without including thousands of rape and sex-related jokes, and I don't think the series needs to have dicey stuff like that in order to function. It was excusable when Luke was a lot younger and didn't understand the implications behind telling those sorts of jokes, but in 2023 trying to do shock humor like that, especially if they tried it with Meggy, Tari, Psycho, and Melanie, will just make the episodes extremely awkward to watch. And outside of the raunchy sex-related jokes, the only other prominent sources of the humor that is completely missing these days are the swearing and the musical numbers, but the latter were clearly removed for copyright-related reasons, and the former due to YouTube's demonetization policy. Now I've already criticized the majority of what this video has to offer at this point, but even for as bad as all of these previous arguments may have been, I can at the very least say that they aren't completely bordering on the kind of conspiratorial nonsense that often plagues the discourse in the more niche areas of the community. I want you to keep this in mind as I tackle this last segment, because I am not kidding when I say that this is without a doubt the absolute worst piece of SMG4 related content that I have ever seen, and it completely baffles my mind that so many people in the SMG4 critic community managed to let this abhorrent filth slide, because these last few minutes leave the realm of constructive criticism and travel completely into conspiratorial territory, and it's thanks to the garbage spewed during this segment that Luke, Kevin, James, FM, the rest of the Glitch team as well as the core SMG4 fanbase itself, no longer take the critics seriously.
Furthermore, through those reaction videos, I get the impression that they see the older videos as something to be mocked rather than honored, much less as a point of reference for how they can improve. One episode they reacted to was 0% of Spaghetti, which is from the very early era of episodes. The entire reaction is Kevin taking the piss out of the editing, completely ignoring that it is a very old video. And at the end of it all, Luke sounded so defeated and ashamed of what he had made.
Well, the editing was awful, the humor was something, and...
That's something else I want to touch on. With everything I've covered about the direction the new episodes have gone in, it's always been Kevin saying these things, not Luke. Now, this is in no way intended to be a hit piece against Kevin, but I can't help but feel he may be at least somewhat responsible for what has happened to the channel. I know Kevin started writing for the series around 2016 and gradually became more involved over time, which sort of correlates with when I felt the quality started to decline. Additionally, on Hobo Bros and a lot of the channel updates, Kevin is basically doing all of the talking and presenting and is at the forefront, while Luke is more in the background, hardly speaking. There's also the time with the Big Chungus episode, where Luke initially didn't want to make it because the meme was dead at that point, but Kevin persuaded him into doing it anyway. All this stuff makes it feel like this is Kevin's channel now, rather than Luke's, which makes me concerned that Kevin may have taken up a bit of a dictatorial role, with Luke being stuck as his yes man. Which is especially problematic when you realize that Kevin hasn't seen any of the episodes released prior to him joining on. All those reaction videos? That's him seeing these episodes for the very first time. So if what I'm theorizing is even remotely true, it would appear that Kevin is enforcing his own vision of the show without taking into account what came before and made people like the channel in the first place.
I feel like I shouldn't have to explain to you all why this segment comes off more so as unhinged conspiratorial rambling rather than constructive criticism. I don't necessarily think that theorization is a bad thing inherently, as it can be used to get you further to the truth in certain scenarios. But there's a massive difference between someone like me speculating on the reasons why Luke may decide to change the titles of non-Mario themed episodes, and Metal Blade 5 outright assuming what Kevin's intentions behind helping the SMG4 brand are. Even if I were to treat any of these claims as serious arguments, nearly everything that is stated during this segment is factually untrue, because for one, he is using reaction videos as legitimate evidence to back up his claims, and not only is this a really stupid thing to do, but he's specifically highlighting the reaction videos where Luke and Kevin are watching the really early episodes. Episodes that Luke has been on record saying that he doesn't like.
Oh, the crazy fight, oh, that one's horrible.
Why is it horrible?
Oh, it's so bad!
Why is it bad?
Okay, so...
It looks still like this with all his videos, by the way. It's just, you know, creators...
Yeah.
The creator dilemma.
This one, we have some dude comes in, hits everyone with toilets. That's the story.
It sounds awesome.
That's the story.
Sounds something a 13-year-old kid would make.
Yeah.
It's great, man. I like it. I'm proud of you.
Thanks, man.
Proud of how far you come.
Like, it's just old text. But, you know, I guess this is what people liked back then. Yeah. I mean, some fans still like this.
Yeah.
They wanted to bring it back, but you know, I gotta evolve.
Furthermore, is it really such a bad thing for Kevin to make fun of the videos that Luke himself has been open about disliking for years? The whole reason behind reacting to your older videos is to point out all of the dated aspects so that you can showcase how far you've come over the years. Not to mention that Luke and Kevin gave a lot of props to the 2013 through 2019 videos that they reacted to. It was only the 2011 and 2012 episodes they outright trashed. And I don't think people like Metal Blade fully realize this, but in spite of how iconic a lot of those earlier 2012 and 2013 episodes are, they can never be openly talked about by Luke or the rest of the crew again, since they feature loads of major appearances from the controversial SMG4 YouTuber Starman3. And if you somehow haven't stumbled across the allegations yet, the TLDR is that Starman3 is a pedophile and was removed from the SMG4 series permanently due to the allegations surrounding him. And not only that, but it was also later on revealed by friends of Luke that Starman3 was using emotional manipulation tactics in order to force him into putting the character in videos where he didn't want to. So I find it to be quite insulting to him that you are accusing his brother of forcing him into making videos that he doesn't want to, when that is actually what happened to him while making the episodes that people like us grew up on. I don't know Luke or Kevin myself, so I can't speak on how exactly the Big Chungus Hunt episode came together. But I'd imagine that it was an idea that Luke wasn't initially keen on, that Kevin encouraged him to pursue anyway since he saw potential in it. And that isn't nearly as bad as Metal Blade is making it seem, since Luke and Kevin were a team that probably balanced ideas off of each other quite often. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that both parties ended up making several videos that they weren't fully on board with. As a YouTuber, it's good for you to make videos that you yourself are passionate about, but it's not entirely a bad thing for you to make videos that help in building your subscriber base. Nor is it a bad thing to experiment with different styles in order to find something that works out the best for you. Kevin encouraging Luke to go beyond what he's used to is his way of getting him comfortable with trying new things. It's really no different than when Kevin suggested that Luke should express himself more back when Hobo Bros first opened up and the SMG4 show miniseries was introduced. And to expand upon this further, Luke prior to Kevin's addition wasn't really seen that often. Sure, he did 2 or 3 videos where he incorporated live-action skits, but outside of that, nobody really knew anything about the guy outside of him creating the SMG4 channel and being really bad at handling criticism. So I find it incredibly odd how you get mad at Kevin for speaking over Luke when Luke himself was never a very social person from the get-go, and it was through Kevin's addition that Luke started to open up more in future videos, eventually taking Kevin's place in the announcements entirely.
Oh man, that was a great movie. Hey guys, thank you all so much for watching the It's Gotta Be Perfect movie. We had so much fun making this and we hope you all enjoyed it. As you know, SMG4 and the SMG4 universe is evolving. And no, this isn't just an arc, it's something much different and much bigger. What that means? Well, you're gonna have to keep watching SMG4 to find out. But what I can say is, I've been really wanting to push the quality on SMG4 and the happiness of you guys means the world to me, so I'm always constantly wanting to make the content fresh and exciting, and I hope this movie is a big step towards that.
I may have been able to let all of the other arguments from before slide as just being either misinformed or based on an intensely biased perspective, but I can't in good conscience defend most of what was said here. Anyone and everyone who unironically thinks accusing Kevin of being a dictator figure is somehow constructive feedback is completely delusional, and it's thanks to videos like this, as well as WHDude's infamous Truth About Chili video, that audiences now have a visceral reaction to people who claim to be critics. Though to give some credit to WHDude at the very least, he did acknowledge how bad the chili video really was, and posted a follow-up correcting his mistakes. The same can't be said for the Metal Blade 5 and his terrible video on modern SMG4. Now before I end this video off, I would just like to quickly bring up the amount of damage that this video ended up causing to the SMG4 fandom as a whole, and explain why stuff like this is a net negative to not just SMG4, but any other scene that thrives off of constructive critique. It's already hard enough to get bigger YouTubers to listen to constructive feedback from a minuscule part of the audience as is, but Luke and Kevin for years were able to show us that they really did care about what the fans thought of the content. Whether it was through episodes like Mario's Challenge and Mario Battle Royale that brought together many older and newer characters, or Luke's defense of videos like Defalfalizer's Top 10 Things We Hate About Modern SMG4. A video that he took genuine advice from and used in order to improve his content going forward. There was a point in time when SMG4 was known for listening to fan feedback, but it was thanks to the release of videos such as this that help in normalizing the extremely niche conspiracies found in some of the more obscure parts of the fandom, where Luke and the rest of the Glitch team no longer started to take the criticism seriously, because it was no longer about helping Luke and Kevin find the balance in order to make both the newer and older fans happy. Instead, it was about chastising them for not giving the classic and randomness era fans exactly what they wanted. And some of you may not realize this, but I used to take part in the very thing that I now strongly speak out against, because I too was a classic era purist that thought the only good years were 2011, 2012, and 2013. Granted, I never once levied conspiratorial nonsense towards Luke and Kevin, but it was thanks to the backlash I received from people such as Puddle of Pizza, Falcon RPG, Luigi Channel 50, and even FM himself that I began to realize how pathetic of a person I was. And to speak further on Puddle of Pizza, it was actually his video on the topic that brought me closer and closer to understanding just how good modern SMG4 could really be. Now granted, I don't necessarily think his video is without its flaws either, nor will his style of text commentary appeal to everyone, but for anyone that wants to see a truly good faith look at the SMG4 series as a whole, I'd strongly recommend watching his video instead of Metal Blades. And if you have enough time to spare, I'd also check out Luigi Channel 50's tier list live stream where he ranks all of the 2011 through 2022 episodes. I didn't agree with all of his takes, but the way he goes about it showcases the positives and negatives of each year evenly. As a community, us SMG4 critics should have done a better job at calling out the bad critiques as opposed to just ignoring them and moving on. And by not doing so we have allowed complete frauds like Vickless, as well as low-tier commentary YouTubers like the Metal Blade 5 to redefine what it means to be an SMG4 critic. The discourse has been dominated by either extremely dated talking points, or conspiratorial nonsense for over 4 years now. Characters like Meggy are still referred to as new characters despite being in the series for over 6 years. Complaints such as there being too much Gmod in the series originated all the way back in 2014. And while you are still able to find less outdated criticism for SMG4's content on other platforms such as Instagram and Reddit, the most popular outlet for these sorts of critiques is still primarily dominated by the dated talking points. So for as long as these rant videos continue to come out with these same dated criticisms, and for as long as we continue to let this conspiratorial garbage make its way into the mainstream discourse, the chances of us getting Luke, Kevin, and the rest of the Glitch team interested in hearing our opinions again is slim to none. That about does it for my response to the Metal Blade 5's video. And before I go, I would just like to quickly shout out Puddle of Pizza again for bringing this discussion back into the public eye. I probably wouldn't have had the motivation to cover this video for a second time without his involvement. I hope that this response will encourage other critics such as myself to call out these sorts of rant videos more often, so that one day we can finally have good SMG4 criticism videos similar to what we have now with SML. Make sure to check out the links I have provided in the description below, and I will see you guys in my next video. Remember, conspiracies do not equal constructive criticism, and we should no longer pass it off as such. Thank you all for listening, and take care.